In a small, quiet village surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a young girl named Mira. Mira was known for her kindness and her deep love for animals, especially horses. She spent most of her days at the village stable, where an old, gentle horse named Storm had become her closest companion. Storm was a majestic gray horse with a scar running down his left flank, a reminder of a past injury. Mira had found him abandoned near the forest years ago, and since then they had been inseparable. Storm was more than just a horse to Mira. He was her confidant, her protector, and her best friend. Mira's life, however, was far from easy. She lived with her strict and overbearing father, who believed that a girl's place was at home tending to chores and preparing for a traditional future. He disapproved of Mira's time at the stable, often scolding her for wasting her days with animals. "You'll never amount to anything if you keep this up," her father would say. "Horses won't feed you or put a roof over your head." But Mira didn't care. She found solace in Storm's presence. Whenever her father's words became too much to bear, she would run to the stable, bury her face in Storm's mane, and whisper her dreams to him. Storm would nuzzle her gently, as if to say, "I understand." One day, while Mira was brushing Storm's coat, she noticed something unusual. The horse seemed restless, his ears twitching and his eyes darting toward the forest. Mira tried to calm him, but Storm kept pulling at his reins, as if trying to lead her somewhere. Curious, Mira followed Storm's lead. The horse led her deep into the forest, where they found a small injured deer trapped in a hunter's snare. The deer's leg was bleeding, and it looked up at Mira with frightened eyes. Without hesitation, Mira knelt beside the deer and carefully freed it from the snare. She used her scarf to bandage its wound and stayed with it until it was calm enough to limp away. Storm watched silently, his eyes filled with what Mira could only describe as pride. "You're amazing, Storm," Mira said, patting his neck. "You always know when someone needs help." But as Mira and Storm made their way back to the village, a sense of unease settled over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something big. The incident with the deer deepened the bond between Mira and Storm. Mira began to notice that Storm had an almost uncanny ability to sense when someone or something was in trouble. Whether it was a lost child in the woods or an injured bird, Storm would lead Mira to them, and together they would help. The villagers started to notice Mira's gift with animals, and many began to seek her out for help. A farmer's cow had gone missing. Mira and Storm would find it. A child's pet rabbit was sick. Mira would nurse it back to health. Slowly but surely, Mira became known as the girl with the healing touch. But Mira's father remained unimpressed. "You're wasting your time," he would say. "Animals won't pay your bills or give you a future." Mira tried to explain how much helping animals meant to her, but her father wouldn't listen. "You'll understand when you're older," he would say dismissively. "Life isn't about dreams. It's about survival." Despite her father's disapproval, Mira continued to spend her days with Storm. She began to dream of becoming a veterinarian, someone who could help animals on a larger scale. She even started reading books about animal care, hiding them under her bed so her father wouldn't find them. One evening, as Mira was reading by candlelight, Storm began to act strangely. He stomped his hooves and whinnied loudly, his eyes fixed on the forest. Mira knew that look. It meant something was wrong. "What is it, boy?" she asked, grabbing her coat and following him outside. Storm led her to the edge of the forest, where a young boy was lying unconscious on the ground. His leg was twisted at an unnatural angle and his face was pale. Mira's heart raced as she knelt beside him. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the boy could hear her. "I'm here to help." With Storm's help, Mira managed to lift the boy onto the horse's back and carry him to the village. The boy's parents were overjoyed and grateful, but Mira's father was furious. "You could have been hurt," he shouted. "What were you thinking, going into the forest at night?" Mira tried to explain, but her father wouldn't listen. "From now on, you're forbidden from going to the stable," he said firmly. "You'll stay home and focus on your chores." Mira's heart broke. She couldn't imagine a life without Storm, but she knew there was no point in arguing with her father. That night, as she lay in bed, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what, she would find a way to keep helping animals. Mira's life became a delicate balancing act. During the day, she obeyed her father's rules, completing her chores without complaint and avoiding any mention of animals. But in the quiet moments, when her father wasn't watching, Mira found ways to keep her dream alive. She continued to read her books, hiding them under her mattress, and she secretly practiced the skills she had learned. One evening, as Mira was finishing her chores, she heard a knock at the door. Her father answered it, and to Mira's surprise, it was Dr. Elias, the village's only veterinarian. "Good evening, Doctor," Elias said politely. "I'm here to speak with Mira, if that's all right." Mira's father frowned but stepped aside. "What is this about?" Dr. Elias smiled warmly. "I've heard about Mira's talent with animals, and I wanted to offer her an opportunity. There's a scholarship program for young people who want to study veterinary medicine. I think Mira would be a perfect candidate." Mira's heart raced. A scholarship? This could be her chance to follow her dream without relying on her father's approval. But her father's expression was unreadable. "A scholarship?" her father repeated slowly. "And what would that involve?" Dr. Elias explained the program in detail. How Mira would attend classes in the town, learn from experienced veterinarians, and eventually earn a degree. "It's a wonderful opportunity," Dr. Elias said. "Mira has a natural gift, and this program would help her develop it." Mira's father was silent for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he nodded. "If it's a scholarship, then it won't cost us anything. And if Mira can still help at home, then I suppose it's all right." Mira's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really, Father? You mean it?" Her father's expression softened slightly. "I may not understand your dreams, Mira, but I can see how much they mean to you. If this is what you want, then I won't stand in your way." Tears of joy filled Mira's eyes. "Thank you, Father. I promise I'll make you proud." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of excitement and preparation. Mira worked harder than ever, balancing her chores with her studies and her visits to the stable. Storm and the other animals were thrilled for her, and they seemed to sense that something big was happening. When the day of the scholarship interview finally arrived, Mira was nervous but determined. She dressed in her best clothes and rode into town with Dr. Elias. As she sat in the waiting room, she thought about Storm and all the animals who had inspired her. She knew she had to do this, not just for herself, but for them. The interview went better than Mira could have hoped. She answered every question with confidence, drawing on her experiences at the stable and her love for animals. When she talked about her dream of becoming a veterinarian, her passion shone through. A few days later, Mira received a letter in the mail. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "Congratulations, Mira. You have been awarded the scholarship." Mira's heart soared. She ran to tell her father, who surprised her with a rare smile. "I'm proud of you, Mira," he said. "You've worked hard for this." With her father's blessing and the support of her friends, Mira began her journey to becoming a veterinarian. She continued to visit the stable whenever she could, and her bond with Storm grew even stronger. Mira's life seemed to be falling into place. She attended her classes in town, excelled in her studies, and continued to help animals whenever she could. Storm remained her constant companion, and the two of them became a familiar sight in the village. Mira on Storm's back, riding to wherever they were needed. But as the months passed, Mira began to feel unwell. At first, it was just fatigue. She would come home from her classes exhausted, barely able to keep her eyes open. Then came the headaches, followed by a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. She tried to ignore it, chalking it up to stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. One evening, as Mira was brushing Storm's coat, she suddenly felt dizzy. The world spun around her, and she collapsed to the ground. Storm whinnied in alarm, nudging her gently with his nose, but Mira couldn't move. Her vision blurred, and everything went black. When Mira woke up, she was in the village clinic surrounded by worried faces. Dr. Elias was there, along with her father and a few villagers. Mira tried to sit up, but Dr. Elias gently pushed her back down. "You need to rest," he said, his voice filled with concern. "We've run some tests and, well, there's no easy way to say this. You're very sick, Mira." Mira's heart sank. What do you mean? What's wrong with me? Dr. Elias hesitated before answering. It's a rare illness, one that's difficult to treat. We'll do everything we can, but you need to prepare yourself. Mira's father looked devastated, but he tried to stay strong for his daughter. We'll get through this, he said, though his voice trembled. You're a fighter, Mira. You've always been a fighter. Mira nodded, but inside she was terrified. She thought about all the things she still wanted to do. Finish her studies, become a veterinarian, help animals in need. She thought about Storm, who had been her rock through everything. She couldn't leave him, not yet. Over the next few weeks, Mira's condition worsened. She spent most of her time in bed, too weak to move. Storm would come to her window every day, nuzzling her hand and whinnying softly as if trying to comfort her. Mira would smile weakly, stroking his nose and whispering, "I'm not giving up, boy." Not yet. But despite her determination, Mira's strength continued to fade. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Mira closed her eyes and took her last breath. Her father was by her side, holding her hand and weeping silently. Outside, Storm let out a mournful whinny as if he knew his beloved friend was gone. The village was in mourning. Mira's death had left a void that no one could fill. She had been a beacon of kindness and hope, and her loss was felt deeply by everyone who knew her. The villagers gathered to pay their respects, their faces filled with sorrow as they remembered the girl who had touched so many lives. Mira's funeral was held on a cloudy afternoon, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Her coffin was placed in the center of the village square, surrounded by flowers and candles. Storm stood nearby, his head bowed and his eyes filled with grief. He hadn't left Mira's side since her death, and now he stood vigil over her coffin, as if waiting for her to return. As the villagers began to say their final goodbyes, Storm suddenly became restless. He stomped his hooves and whinnied loudly, his eyes fixed on the coffin. The villagers tried to calm him, but Storm wouldn't be still. He reared up on his hind legs, his powerful hooves crashing down on the lid of the coffin. "Stop him!" someone shouted, but no one dared to get too close. Storm was a large, strong horse, and his grief made him unpredictable. The horse continued to trample the coffin, his hooves cracking the wood and sending splinters flying. The villagers watched in shock, unsure of what to do. Then, as the lid of the coffin splintered open, a faint cry echoed from inside. The crowd fell silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. A child's cry? How was that possible? One of the villagers, a brave man named Thomas, stepped forward and peered into the coffin. His face turned pale as he saw what was inside. There's a baby," he stammered. "A newborn baby." The villagers gasped, their shock turning to confusion. How could there be a baby in Mira's coffin? She had been so young, so innocent. It didn't make sense. Storm stopped trampling and stood still, his chest heaving as he looked down at the baby. His eyes seemed to soften, as if he knew he had done what he needed to do. The discovery of the baby sent shockwaves through the village. No one could understand how a newborn had ended up in Mira's coffin, and rumors began to spread like wildfire. Some whispered that it was a miracle, while others speculated about darker secrets. Mira's father, devastated by his daughter's death, was now faced with yet another mystery. He stood by the coffin, staring at the tiny, crying baby with a mixture of confusion and grief. "What is this?" he murmured, his voice trembling. How could this happen?" Dr. Elias stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "We need to get this baby to the clinic immediately," he said. "He's weak and needs care." The villagers quickly cleared a path as Dr. Elias carefully lifted the baby from the coffin and wrapped him in a blanket. Storm watched silently, his eyes filled with an almost human-like understanding. It was as if he knew he had done his part. As the baby was rushed to the clinic, the village elder, a wise woman named Agatha, called for calm. "We need to find out the truth," she said firmly. "This is no time for rumors or fear. Mira was one of us, and we owe it to her to uncover what happened." Over the next few days, the village began to piece together the puzzle. It turned out that Mira had been secretly helping a young woman from a neighboring village, a woman who had been shunned by her family for becoming pregnant out of wedlock. Mira had promised to help her and the baby, but when the woman died during childbirth, Mira had taken it upon herself to care for the newborn. Mira had hidden the baby, knowing that her father and the villagers would never understand. She had planned to raise the child herself, but her illness had taken her before she could reveal the truth. In her final days, she had written a letter explaining everything, but it had gone unnoticed in the chaos of her death. The letter was found tucked under her mattress, along with a small blanket and a few baby clothes. In it, Mira had written, "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. Please take care of the baby. He is innocent and he deserves a chance at life. I couldn't save his mother, but I hope I can save him. Love, Mira." The villagers were moved to tears by Mira's selflessness. Even her father, who had always been so strict and unyielding, broke down as he read the letter. "My daughter," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You were so much braver than I ever knew." The baby, named Luca in honor of Mira's kindness, became a symbol of hope and redemption for the village. Mira's father, despite his initial shock, took the child in and raised him as his own. The villagers rallied around the family, offering their support and love. Storm, too, played a role in Luca's life. The horse became the boy's protector, watching over him as he grew. Luca would often sit by the stable, listening to stories about Mira and her incredible bond with Storm. Though he never knew her, he felt her presence in every act of kindness and every lesson of love. Years passed, and Luca grew into a kind and compassionate young man, much like the sister he never met. He inherited Mira's love for animals and often spent his days at the stable, caring for Storm and the other horses. The villagers would smile as they watched him, seeing Mira's spirit alive in him. One day, as Luca stood by the stable, Storm nudged him gently, just as he had done with Mira so many years ago. Luca smiled, patting the horse's neck. "I know, boy," he said softly. "She's still here, isn't she?" Storm whinnied softly, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. It was as if he knew that Mira's legacy would live on, not just in Luca, but in the hearts of everyone she had touched. And so, the village continued to thrive, guided by the memory of a girl who had shown them the power of love, compassion, and selflessness. Mira's story became a legend told and retold for generations, reminding everyone that even in the darkest times, there is always hope.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.